Or I'll take that one back.
State's attorney's in the room. We can start. It was
Yeah.
a pleasant surprise.
That's
There you go.
Lasky, Michelle.
Lenny,
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to bring the Committee of the Whole meeting of Tuesday, September 15th, go to order. It's going to be an interesting meeting. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Allen. Bates. Bates here. Berman,
Berman here.
Brown. Davis. Ford. Frye.
Here.
Iqbal. Iqbal. Gums,
Gums here.
Kenyon. Caius,
Gaius present.
Leonard. Lewis,
Lewis here.
Martin,
Present.
Molina,
Molina present.
Sanchez, Shepro, Silva,
Silva is here.
Strathman,
here.
Sturgis,
Surges here.
Pepe,
Pepe reluctantly here.
Wallace, Wojnicki,
In person.
Grog.
In person. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have Wallace, Davis, Brown, Iqbal, Kenyon, Leonard, and Sanchez are not in attendance. Is that correct? All right, thank you. All right, well, we will not be making any votes today, perhaps some recommendations. After we get done discussing this, and welcome State's Attorney Mosser.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you here today. Jamie, while you're here, why don't you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. To the republic.
The republic for which it stands,
One nation.
nation under God,
Indivisible.
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
On your agenda, you'll see that there's an approval of minutes for both August 23rd and August 30th. August 30th is going to be deferred. We have change of staff. So we're just getting caught up on that, but August 23rd is available. So may I get a motion and a second to approve the minutes of August 23rd?
Gaius move.
Berman second.
Thank you. Who was the second? Mavis Bates. Are there any changes or edits to these minutes? None. Clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
Bates, aye.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Ford, Fraz,
Raz, yes.
Gums,
Gums, yes.
Caius,
Gaius, yes.
Lewis,
Lewis, yes.
Martin, Molina,
Molina, yes.
Silva,
Silva, yes.
Strathman,
Yes.
Sturgis,
Surges, yes.
Pepe,
Pepe, yes.
Wojnicki,
Yes.
Piron.
Yes. Very good. I don't believe that there's any public comment. I don't see anybody in the audience and I don't see anybody online. No, okay, good. All right, Mr. Onsick.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's see, I have the presentation ready for you. Basically, it's the same presentation as it has been. I've simply made some updates to it. And one of the first slides will kind of run through what those updates were as soon as it's displayed. But yep, just about. Okay. There we go. Okay, so these are the changes that have occurred since the last time I presented the summary. There's been an increase in probation salary reimbursement revenue of $147,000. 2 positions have been removed from the judiciary. The lists of new non-Safety Act personnel and new Safety Act personnel have been corrected, updated to reflect some of the recent changes that have been made and to reflect some additional information that came in where we realized there was a couple of positions that were located in or listed in one list that really should have been listed in another. So now these lists have been updated and are correct to the best of our knowledge. Also, as a result of some corrections to some of the vacant positions, we then needed to fine tune the IMRF, the FICA, the health insurance, and the 3% non-union wage increases in accordance with those changes. So those are more minor changes that were made. There was an error that I just found this morning, and I had sent you an email about, and this was my own error in updating the sheriff's health insurance to reflect the new final rates that were approved by the Human Services Committee. It's a manual process that needed to be done, and I accidentally either picked up the wrong figures or failed to update a manual figure within the sheriff's office budget. And so I found that in the process of preparing the health insurance fund budget. So as one of the final steps that we have. So we're in terms of completion of the budget process. And so fortunately, because we do have that process, I was able to find that error, but unfortunately it was not in time before I was able to send out the presentation initially. So I did revise the presentation to reflect this additional $449,000 expense. But this is, again, it's only in the sheriff's health insurance budget, which of course increases the sheriff's budget, which then of course increases the deficit by that amount. Then as a result of learning more about the Veterans Commission and what is happening with that, it seems obvious that we need to increase the amount of property tax revenue that is allocated to the Veterans Commission in order to balance their budget because of the $155,000 increase in expenses. And so basically it was a shift of the allocation of property tax revenue out of the general fund to the Veterans Commission. So their budget is now balanced, but at the expense of the general fund, which is what we had already anticipated. As a result of all these changes.
Joe,
Yes.
if I just may interrupt,
Yes.
just a Veterans Fund, that is Public Act number 102-0732. If any of you ever wanted to look it up, I'll say it again, Public Act 102-0732.
And so the overall deficit as a result of all of the above changes increased by $289,000 since it was last presented to you. And then also some information came in from the state's attorney's office regarding their requested equity increase. And so I've added a couple of slides to address that as well. One of the things that we're going to be doing this year is to repeat what we did last year, where last year we had placed the budget for new positions in the contingency account within the general fund. And we did that so as to protect that budget so that it could only be used for the new positions. And then as those positions were filled during the year, we would release that budget from the contingency and add it to the appropriate department or office budgets as those positions were filled. And we do that on a quarterly basis. So I just wanted to put that out there again, that's our intention to do that again for all the new positions that are non-Safety Act and also for the Safety Act positions. And again, it'll be released as those positions are filled. And there'll be language within the budget resolution and ordinance that would address that so that it's official. It'll be the official, I guess, direction from the board that is how it will be handled. So that's our intention. It seems to work pretty well. It's a little bit of an administrative task to be able to keep up with that, but it seems that it's worth it and it accomplishes the purpose that it's intended.
Joe,
me, ma'am.
before you go on, does everybody understand what Joe just said? What we're doing with the money?
Yes.
Being hidden in a contingency account,
It's not being hidden. It's just,
but it won't be swept.
no sweeping. It's just being released as needed, as requested, and then approved by the board. So it'll be going through the finance committee
As people are hired.
as,
Madam Chair,
and then it moves up.
yes. Does that mean that when an individual is hired, there will have to be a resolution that will do that?
Well, how we've handled it this past year is there was a resolution quarterly. So each quarter, we looked, we would check to see.
So
who
there'd be a
had-
resolution each
Yeah.
quarter for all of the ones?
All of them combined, yes. And so it's basically a routine, just to follow the guidance laid out in the original resolution when the budget was adopted.
Mr. Iqbal? And welcome, Mr. Iqbal.
Turn it on.
Okay, now it's on. I think it's a very good suggestion. But he's proposing to release the budget when the person is hired. We had this problem last year, that the budget is given to a department and the person is not hired, and then the department head says, I own that money,
Say,
and getting it back is hard. So releasing it at the time the person is hired, I think provides some checks and balances. Thank you. I believe it should not only be for Safety Act, it should be for everything, if possible.
And
And
Mr. Sturgis, I know you're having your hand up, but let Mr. Onsick respond to that,
I
please.
would just like to clarify that it will be for both the new personnel for Safety Act as well as the other new positions. So there's a couple of lists in the presentation that show what those positions are. And so those will be the positions for which the budgets will be held in the contingency account.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, sure. Mr. Sturgis, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just think that this is a absolutely outstanding idea. Behind the scenes, we've had several conversations going with this. And Joe, thank you for bringing this forward and making it easy. Appreciate it.
Sure, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, Ms. Wodecki.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Madam Chair. The 27 new personnel being hired for the Safety Act, are those permanent positions? Will
Yes.
will they always be on staff at the county, or is this more of a trial? I understood we were kind of a trial county for the Safety Act. Is that correct?
May I answer?
Ms. Mosser and I are both smiling at each other.
Okay.
Long discussion about this the other day. So we are a pilot program right now for the implementation of the Safety Act.
Okay.
So because these positions are necessary based on what the Safety Act has given us that we are going to have in perpetuity unless the legislator changes it, these will always be permanent positions.
Oh, they will. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
So, but if I may, these are going to be metered out slowly, surely as needed. So we're not going to hire 27 people, put out the call in December. There may be 3 people hired, 4 people then on top of that. So that slowly but surely, everyone is filtered in as needed, as required, since it is a new act.
Okay.
An unfunded new act.
I
Just wanna make sure
know.
that's noted.
Yeah.
Except for the grants that are, we're supposed to go find, right?
Right, so I have a grants administrator and I've put her on this task. If we find any grants, we will certainly apply for them.
I've been told there's many grants.
I've been told that too.
Okay.
And I've been shared that. I
Have
think
you
everyone
found them
knows.
is the question.
Have not.
Talk to our legislators about that.
Correct. And I have a fantastic grant administrator who has been used by the entire judicial system. So we don't keep her just to ourselves. So if there's one that benefits court services, she'll help them. If there's one that benefits the judiciary, she'll help.
Very good. So everyone is on the search for money, absolutely.
Well,
Mr. Kenyon, welcome.
Yes.
Okay, Joe, if there's any other questions on this?
Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to run through these slides briefly because most of it has already been presented to you. So this is just the summary that shows you that the deficit is now at $16,326,459.
Well, could you go back You did
It's there.
2022, it shows the total revenue budget at 92,382. What was the actual revenue? So did we not have more revenue than we had anticipated in the budget? Or has
Yes,
it been
that is
adjusted?
true. I'm sorry, I don't have that figure in my head. But you're correct. We had several $1 million more. So this is just a comparison to from budget to budget. I didn't use actual.
Okay.
Any other questions? None online? Okay.
Madam Chairman, this is Alan.
Yes, Miss Allen.
Thank you for letting me speak. I am thinking that when we meet out the 3% raise to our non-union people, a great deal of that money is going to be eaten up by health insurance increases. It just comes with the deal. We want good health insurance, and so the cost goes up and the employees absorb that. I would rather see, I don't know how, I haven't talked to my colleagues, and that's on me, but I would rather see us do the 4% increase. And if that's a difference of $357,000, that's somewhere between 3 and 4 new positions. I think I'd rather have the 4% for our current employees than add 3 to 4 new positions. Does anyone agree with that?
No.
So I'll repeat the question. To increase the current compensation, that's not equity adjustment. This is just a CPI increase. Should we call it 4% for next year? And then potentially decrease the asks for potentially 3 new positions by the equal amount. So why don't we put that on the table for right now? I mean, not table it, but just put it aside. And then go through the rest of it, and perhaps we can bring that back up if that's all right with you, Miss Allen, as we see the whole request.
Of course it is, and very well put. Thank you. I just wanted to get it out in the ether.
Okay. The ether is welcome to hear it.
Okay. So this is the same summary that's broken out into the categories. So we start out with the FY22 budget. That's our starting point. And then from there, we added the Safety Act expenses and the new positions, and then other changes. And within other changes, there's a significant increase in revenue. And this has to do mostly with things like sales tax, primarily, and other revenue sources. And then the expenses increased by $10 million under other. And this is where you have the summary amount of all the things that have caused the increase that have nothing to do with Safety Act or new positions or the 3% union increase. So these would include collective bargaining increases that have already been approved and that are being carried forward into FY23. And this would be things like the expenses, contractual expenses that are being increased as a result of the actual contractual agreements or inflation, commodity expenses that are increased as a result of inflation. And then you also would have health insurance increases in there. So it's the combination of everything that is not the other columns. And then this is a way to itemize the cost of the 3% non-union increase, as well as the $700,000 equity adjustment. And I think I mentioned this the last time, the reason why it reduces revenue by $89,600 in the equity adjustment is because we need to shift that much of the property tax revenue over to FICA and IMRF funds to pay for the FICA and IMRF related to the $700,000 equity adjustment. Similarly, in the 3% non-union increase, we have to shift over $177,000 of property tax revenue to the FICA and IMRF funds. So that's why you see those negative amounts there. And I guess if you go all the way back to the earlier columns, those negative amounts in the revenues line under the Safety Act expenses and the new positions, that's also because of the shift that needs to occur of property tax revenue for FICA and IMRF. So that's the reason for those negative amounts on the revenue line. And
Yes, Mr. Iqbal.
Okay. The first column, which you say is a 22 budget, I believe it is amended budget, isn't it? Figure.
yes, it's the amended budget as of a date in August, yes.
Okay, so we have incurred use of reserve in the amount of 12.9 million. Is that correct? Or is it not the same?
Yes, as a result of what was originally approved in the budget, and then and also there were some budget adjustments that occurred during the year that would have additionally drawn upon the reserves to equal that total. Yes.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
And this is, of course, is according to the budget. You know, the actual, we're bringing in more revenue and our expenses will probably be lower than what was budgeted. And so I'm anticipating that we probably are not going to need those reserves, even though we budgeted for them.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, that's Caius?
It's Mr.
That's
Caius.
we will not need the 12.9 million.
Well, that's my anticipation. Now, there might be a small amount we may need, but in generally speaking, I don't think we will need it. No. Because we're so far ahead in revenue already, and we're anticipating some savings as well on the expense side.
I'll take that as a no.
So we're not using the reserves that we had allocated for 2022.
We're not anticipated to use them. It's true. And that's already factored into the reserve balance that comes at the end. So the fact that we're not going to be using them.
Oh,
It's so, yeah, don't think of this as additional money you have. It's already factored in.
It's already factored in.
Okay,
Well, that was actually very good news.
yes. Yes. And I know the question has kept coming up, well, if we're so far ahead in revenue this year, are you taking that into account in the budget for next year? And yes, I absolutely have done so. And that is one of the reasons why the revenue in that other change column, why it is so much more. It's almost $15 million more. It's because I'm basing the budget for next year based on what we're actually collecting this year and projecting that outward. So we are taking advantage of how much more we are collecting this year than what was budgeted.
Mr. Onsick,
Yes.
although this is a double-edged sword,
Uh-huh.
as inflation is hitting all of us and the expense of everything, then I would assume that the tax would go up to represent that as well. So eventually that'll be a benefit to us. A higher inflation rate, we'll have to pay more for our things, but we'll be getting additional tax revenue also because of that.
And there is I believe it's a 2% increase factored into, so we've taken like what we're projecting out for sales tax for this year and adding, I think it's 2% to it for next year. It may be more, it may be less, depending on how people spend, but that's what's factored in for the budget next year.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Iqbal.
Yeah, Madam Chair, follow-up question on the use of reserves. This amount is budgeted, but up to date, 8 months into the year, how much of the reserve have we used actually?
Well, it's not easy to say at this point because we're not finished with the year and we never know to the end of the year. We don't have the type of financial system where you can just run a monthly report and say, oh, this is where we're at. We do it once a year because that's when we do all the accruals and everything that goes along with it. But just based on how we're so far ahead with revenue alone, I'm sorry, I look at so many numbers, I don't have them in my head, but I want to say that we're already ahead by $7 or $8 million in general fund revenue alone. And so I think given that we're only in August, I think that's a pretty good sign that we're on track to not need that 12 or $13 million that was budgeted.
So what are you thinking at this point? In a ballpark number, not exact number, but how much do you think at a midpoint have we used? Did we use 6 million or did we use 3
I don't-
million or?
I mean, we drew it down and it's sitting in the general fund. But I think when we come to the end of the year, we're going to give it back. I think that's
Okay,
what will happen.
so you think we will get it back?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it will not go anywhere. No, yeah, it'll go, it will remain back into the general fund. Is that correct? It just gets wrapped over, or does it go, literally, do we transfer it back?
Well, we literally transferred back. So right now, most of the reserves were transferred in to the general fund at the beginning of the year because that's what we budgeted. But it just sits there until we get to the end of the year. And this is where, every year we calculate what the excess revenue over expenditures is. And then we decide, what we're going to do with it. Well, in this case, we can return what we drew down back to the original sources, or, if you have a different idea where you'd like them to go, we can adjust it, but that's basically how it's done. So it's not going to actually physically take place until I would say March, because that's when we are close to having all the finer revenue and expenditure figures.
And then I know we're following up, but Ms.
Go
Bates,
ahead.
she's been patient.
So this looks like a windfall to me, this rather sudden burst of money, $12 million or whatever it was in an increase in revenue. Is this related to the end of COVID? This isn't going to happen every year, right? That we find $12 million of, this would be a mistake, I believe, to think, oh, we're going to have this every year.
Oh, I
correct?
see what you're saying. No, you're correct. I don't think we can expect to come out ahead, 12 or 13 million.
This isn't going to happen year after year
I
and bail
don't
us out
think
of.
so. No, this happened
what I
because we
wanted
were
to
very
specify.
conservative in budgeting revenue
Mhm.
for 2023 because we did not know, because we put the budget together in this last summer and we did not know how, how well the economy would recover.
Mhm.
And so we were just going by what we knew at the time. And I was basing those key revenue figures or budget figures on the Illinois Municipal League and also the state of Illinois' projections. But by the time we're putting our budget together, those figures are already old
Mhm.
and they're not renewed until after we put our budget together. So it was using older figures, which are more conservative, which is kind of all what's led to us being so far ahead
But
when we
I
actually.
think that's a good thing. And I don't
Yes.
want people thinking that this is going to happen every year and we don't have to take other measures to bail ourselves out.
Correct. I would agree with you.
It's also because of the increase in sales tax revenue due to the online sales being taxed in the district
I think
that
you're
they-
right.
that you're
Yes.
purchasing that
Yes.
item.
Yes. So that also led to the increase in revenue that was not anticipated because we just didn't know what the impact would be.
And now, Mr. Iqbal.
Just a short follow-up. Going back to 2021, not 2022, which we had a shortfall in 2021 as well. And then it was recovered as the year went on. And by March 2022, I think we were ahead. Instead of being in deficit, we were in surplus. Instead of being $10 million or $5 million in the deficit, we came out 5 million in a surplus in 2021.
I don't remember
Okay.
exactly, but I don't doubt what you're saying.
Okay, so we'll
Okay.
follow up, yeah.
And I think what we just need to do is perhaps at our next meeting, take a look at the numbers we were, and I see what you're saying. to take a look at where we were at 21 and where we projected a deficit spending use of reserves, whether or not that needed to happen. And then 22, much the same, to return that money back to reserves, excess revenue over expenses, and now forecasting into 23. So we just have a through line for this board, since this is a relatively new board, and then 20 as well. It's just an interesting historical data. That's all it is.
So did we, I guess my question would be, did we use reserves in 2021?
It was projected that we did.
Did more.
No,
We ended up with surplus.
we returned what, 10, $12 million back. Yeah, we didn't use.
That went back into capital fund, correct?
Well, which year are we talking about? I'm lost track.
What year? What year are we in?
Talking about how we ended 21.
Yes, correct.
Yes, there was it 10 or 12 million ahead,
Mhm.
and some of it was returned back to property tax freeze protection, and some was returned back
Capital
to the capital fund. Basically, those were the two main ones. And there might have been some that was returned back to COVID reimbursement. but
relief. Mhm.
I can't, it might have been the revenue recoupment that might have been returned. I'm going off of my memory, which isn't very good.
But I believe you're correct. Mr. Martin, I do see, but Mr. Surges has had his hand up. So he was first. Mr. Surges?
I just wanted to respond to Ms. Bates's comment. I saying that we're not going to have this going forward is tough to do if you don't look at the historical past, which I believe you're touching on right now. Because I think we have had those revenues come in because we are very, very conservative on our forecasting of those, and appropriately so. And I do believe, Joe, if I'm not mistaken, when those revenues are returned, meaning they've come in and we had projected them lower, are those typically to the general fund or to the property tax reserve fund? By what discretion how do we return that money?
Well, okay, as a matter of principle, we should not ever use the general fund balance to balance our budget. So we should never draw anything out of it, because once you do that, it raises red flags for bond ratings, et cetera, et cetera. So what I try to do then is to hold the general fund balance as flat as possible. And so once that's why we wait till we're just about know what every penny of revenue and expenses we have in the general fund at the end of the year. So that's why it takes till March or approximately. And at that point, we know exactly how much, or close to the penny of how much we have excess revenue over expenditures, so that we can then move the entire amount to specific reserve funds. And generally it's to the property tax freeze protection fund or the capital fund. And sometimes a portion of it will go to the public safety sales tax fund. And then if there are specific projects, they may go into the special reserve. So we take care of the entire amount of excess revenue over expenditures by allocating it to those few reserves, so that there's hardly anything at all being added back to the general fund at the end of the year, so that we can easily access those reserve funds for whatever purpose we need without having to touch the general fund. Because if we were to just let it in the general fund, then if you need it, now you've got to take it out of the general fund. And that's when all the red flags come out, that why are you doing that in terms of bond rating agencies. So
Joe,
that's
we are asking you to dumb this down to our level so much, and it's so not fair to you, and thank you for your patience.
You're welcome. But I do want to, I guess, emphasize that, yes, we were very conservative the past few years with our revenue, But I am not this year. I ignored the Illinois Municipal League forecast. I ignored the state of Illinois forecast, and I just based it based on our own experience. So it is much higher than it would have been in terms of next year's budget than if I had based it on theirs. And I'm not saying they're wrong or right. I mean, I'm just trying to explain that please don't think that just because we're conservative in the past 2 years, that this is also just as conservative. This is far from it. And so I feel like I'm really sticking my neck out by
Hear, hear.
giving you these figures. But I think at the same time, they can be supported by what we actually have experienced in our own county.
And I would disagree with you, Mr. Onsick. You're probably one of the most fiscally conservative
Well,
people we've ever met.
Okay, well,
Uh,
for me, it's
Which we're
sticking my
glad.
neck out.
Keep it up. Mr. Martin.
As I've listened to these conversations over the weeks and the months, they're being had as if we have options to discuss. Now, we don't have options to, in my mind, we don't have options to discuss. We have committed as a board to certain goals of increasing salaries. We have to meet obligations that are mandated by the state. We may have some discretion on how many people are necessary or how many get hired, but the bottom line is the expenditure portion of our budget is substantially in place and isn't going to change. Also, whether we like it or not, the revenue portion, our sources of revenue aren't going to change. I was one who believed that I do still believe at some point in time, we're going to have a referendum to in some manner increase our revenue if we're going to, in the long term, address the financial needs of the county. The likelihood of that passing and the first time around, certainly the likelihood of it passing in the context in which it was originally proposed is remote, but what we have two issues here. We have the long term and the short term. We can't change the short term in my mind. And so when we talk about how are we going to balance the budget, the answer is, I think we're going to use reserves, and we're going to use and properly, we should be taking whatever money that we didn't spend this year and that money should be, and whatever we have to do to meet accounting standards or audit standards or whatever else needs to be put aside and made available to assist in balancing the budget next year. And to me, that's the end of the conversation. The rest of this is all repetitive, and at least from my one perspective, it's not productive. We're having conversations as if we have options. And to repeat my first sentence, I don't think we have options. We just need to get this done and move on. And if we need a referendum in the future, we need to start planning for it now and not at some 11th hour date when we say, geez, we've got a problem here. We've got to deal with it. This is a long-term plan in my part. And in my mind, it's a long-term plan that needs to be started now with stimulating public interest in putting together the necessary committees to support this type of thing, which we can't do as a governmental body. But for the next year's budget, there's no option. Why are we talking about it? We have to spend reserves, and we have to take what we have. In my mind, we have to take what's going to be in excess this year, and it needs to be properly escrowed so that it can be applied against next year's shortfall. And to me, that's the end of the sentence. And unless I'm missing something.
And if I may, I think much of what you said is spot on, and I totally agree. But the things that we're missing are the equity increases. We have an additional approximately $1 million equity request beyond the 700,000 from the state's attorney. We also have the new increase with the Veterans Association of $158,000.
If those are,
It's very modest. That's brand new for us that we have to fund. That's reduced from our property tax levy, the income from that, and that'll go up every year depending upon what the veterans ask, and we cannot say no to that. Then we also have another further discussion is whether or not you want to advance a increase in the real estate tax. And that is something that needs to be discussed. Is the board ready to move forward on that or not?
I'm not suggesting that first off, the changes that were, when you look against 16 million and you look against the entire budget, in my mind, the changes that we're contemplating in the budget are nuances and not, they don't make or break the deal. You're right. We have to consider whether we want to raise the levy. That doesn't deal with the present issue. We have to, by the end of this year, we have to say how we're going to fund next year's budget. To me, that's done. We don't have any option to do it. And then the long term becomes, what do we want to do with the levy for calendar year 23? And what do we want to do for the possibility of a referendum? Those are questions both that need to be addressed, but it becomes a red herring if that's rolled into the conversation that relates to what do we do for next year's budget. We don't have any option. There's no option available other than to use reserves and to take the money that we have left over at the end of this year, when we find out what the final number is in March, and apply it towards that number. And the rest of this conversation, I just don't find to be productive. We're asking questions and there are no answers to them. I mean, the answer is we have to use reserves. And I've ranted. Thank you all for the permission.
Thank you. Yes, and Mr. Surges, you'll be next. Mr. Berman.
Well, Madam Chair, thank you. We do have an exception. Obviously, if we approved our levy increase, we would have that revenue next year to be used to balance next year's budget. So it's not just a, cut and dried on using our resources that we have put aside. We could make that, I don't remember what the numbers are. If we took a 5% increase, I don't remember what the dollar amount was, but that is another alternative to balancing the budget next year.
If I might, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that.
Okay.
I'm just saying when you look at the bulk of the issues that are facing us, we're going to use reserves. Maybe we vote to increase the levy. And so isn't it about how much is it, Joe? If
Not
we,
much.
Well, I have the exact figure on a further slide, but it's around 2.5 million or so.
yeah, so it would make a difference. There's no question it would make a difference, but that's the only conversation we're going to have between now and December 31st or whatever the day, I forget the day we need to approve this thing,
The
but
29th of November.
okay, fine. So we decide whether we're going to raise the levy, and that means that we use less reserves, but we don't have any other option.
We don't.
So let's just move on and try to have a constructive conversation on how we best manage the demands, and the only change in the demands that we can make now are nuances. So let's get off the dime and have it done.
We could present a budget then that requires all different alternatives, okay? So that we can accept the budget as we present it.
I would disagree with that because we have a large request coming in from the state's attorney, which we have to talk about. So if we can just put that aside as well. And then we also have requests going from a 3% to a 4% CPI increase, and reducing and that I would say is fine tuning, reducing it equally by the $356,000. That was Ms. Allen's request. Mr. Surges, you've been patient. Your hand is up.
Mr. Martin, I just want to respond just a bit. While I agree with the notion that we seem to be talking about the same thing and beating this horse to death, we have yet to consider any options where we're pulling this back a bit to make the notion that we've agreed to the equity increases, or we've agreed to this staff request, or we've agreed to, funding something. I don't believe we've agreed to that. I believe that we have the responsibility to look at all this and compare it. And if we need to go back to a zero increase budget and begin looking at that forward, then that's the exercise that we should be doing. And we haven't taken those steps yet, John. I mean, I've really been patiently waiting to see how we're going to do it. And we haven't. I would love to see a zero increase budget, except for those contractual obligations that we're already committed to via collective bargaining agreements. And then as an alternate, say, what does the Safety Act at the most minimum do to us, and see where that's at. before we go forward. So in one respect, I totally agree with what you're saying. On the other respect, I don't believe we've done the homework yet. We do have questions to answer, and just saying we're going to reserve to pull it, I don't know that that's the best solution that we have, although that might ultimately be the only solution. But that doesn't mean you take, as big a piece of the pie as we need to. I don't know if that makes sense, but thank you.
Ms. Winnicki and then Ms. Bates.
Madam Chair, just briefly, this is all really good discussion, but I think we should just let Mr. Anzek finish his presentation,
Okay.
and I think
Okay.
we'd have a better
You
understanding.
get into it. Is that,
Yeah.
we're on agreement, Ms.
Lord
Bates?
Darwin, I want to agree with Mr. Martin to a certain level, but I think that's an simplification. We're not done. We have in the detail, the devil is still in the details, and we have to keep working on that. Otherwise, you're right, we have to take out of the reserve fund.
It's going to be out of the reserves. Mr. Anzick, the floor is yours, and I'm going to table any discussion until he gets done so we can have ample discussion, because I'd like to get everybody out of here no later than 5 o'clock. 4:30 would be lovely.
Okay, well, basically, the rest of the presentation, I really will fly through because it's just an update of what you've seen before, so there's no reason to spend a lot of time on it. Like, for example, this is the revenue broken into the individual columns. So, and basically, this is available for you in case any particular slide is of interest to you to in your own trying to understand what's going on with the budget. So here's the revenues broken down by category. And now these two slides are the expenditures by department broken down by category. So you can see which departments are affected by Safety Act expenses, which departments have new positions, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why this is here. So if you would like to focus in on any particular item, you'll know like what department head or elected official to talk to about it. Here's the rest of the expenses broken down by category. Now, this is just the revenue by classification. So you could understand, well, where are these changes in comparison to last year's budget coming from? Just by revenue classification types, we've got other taxes, which includes the sales tax, the local use tax, the personal property tax, RTA tax. Though that's what's there. Of course, property taxes, self-explanatory. The interest revenue, it's using the rate of return that was suggested by the treasurer's office. You have licenses and permits, other grants, fines, reimbursements, and then the transfers in. This is that's basically what is coming into the county from special revenue. I'm sorry, coming into the general fund from special revenue funds to help pay for like primarily IT expenses. So that's what is represented there. And then charges for services are just that. So a lot of those are coming from the recorder's office and the county clerk's office. And then you have the expenses classified. So you see the total for salaries and wages, the total for contractual, total for commodities, the total for employee benefits. That services line, that was a budget adjustment we made last year where we said where the sheriff voluntarily reduced his budget by $1 million. Well, it was just a general reduction to services. We're not doing that this year, so that's why it shows as an increase in the change column. And the transfers out, that's primarily, I would say, the debt service that we're repaying on our bonds that have to do with the income tax revenue that's coming in. So we transfer that out. And then this is also transfers are going out to help pay for like CaneCom, the services used by the sheriff, et cetera. So it's a combination of things there. We have a small amount being budgeted for capital. And then we still have the same $1,050,000 contingency budget that we have been having the past few years, and it seems to be more than adequate. This is the revenue by department, so I don't need to go through all the departments, but That's what this is. Then you've got expenditures by department. And the second page of expenditures by department. Revenues, net expenditures means like for each department, we're taking their revenue and subtracting their expenditures. So most everyone has a negative amount because they're not, I should say, they're generating less revenue than they are expenses. And that's why it's mostly negative. Development is one of the exceptions where they're getting more in for their permanent revenue than they have in expenses. And the treasurer collector, because of their property, or I'm sorry, because of their tax sale each year, they bring in more revenue than their expenses. Recorder's office is another one who brings in more revenue than expenses. And then that last one, general government revenue, there are no expenses, it's all revenue. And that is where sales tax and property tax and all of the other tax revenues that we collect are located. Okay, then we have the list of Safety Act positions that have already been added. This hasn't changed, but I wanted to at least present it to you so you could see that this is part of Safety Act. It's just that it's already been, we've already started incurring them. And then we have the new ones that are being added for FY23. So it's just an itemized list. And just to point out, it's that salary, health, and dental column is just that. It's a combination of their salary, their health insurance expense, and dental expense. So it's not just salary. And you can go through, and then also I tacked on the additional expenses that are related to Safety Act, but are non-personnel. So you got membership expense, contractual expense, employee training, software, hardware, office equipment. So that's the total for 2023. Then you have all the new positions that have nothing to do with Safety Act. So this would be the positions in IT, building management, state's attorney, court services, coroner, development. And then I also including on the state's attorney new positions in the insurance liability account, even though they're not directly charged to the general fund, by increasing the insurance liability fund expense, that causes us to have to shift more property tax revenue out of the general fund in order to cover those expenses in the insurance liability fund. So it impacts the amount of deficit in the general fund for that reason. And then this is the projected deficits without the equity adjustment and without the Safety Act expenses. And the reason why I think this slide is important, at least to me when I look at this, is it is showing you what the deficit is without those items. So I think we've been so focused on this additional expense of Safety Act and maybe the equity adjustments, we're thinking that that is what is the source of our problem, but it is not. We still have a $12 million deficit for FY23 without those items. And we've come to this place because we have allowed an increase in recurring expenses to be approved without a corresponding increase in recurring revenues. And so we are no longer in structural balance, and that is why we have this issue. That is why we have these deficits. And it's the Safety Act and the equity adjustments that are only going to be adding to it, but it's not the cause of it. So we, as Mr. Martin indicated and others of you, we do need a plan for how are we going to bring the revenue back in line with our expenses, whether it's revenue increases or expenditure cuts, a combination. We need to do that to be in structural balance. And then that way, anything that we do have in terms of excess revenue over expenditures could be placed in reserves, and then those reserves could be used for capital improvements, which we are sorely in need of. So I just wanted to use this as an illustration of that, as well as to show you what the impact of a property tax increase would be. So right now, we are allowed to do a 5% increase in 2023. So that would increase our revenue almost 2.5 million. And then I just projected forward using a 3% maximum allowable increase for FY 23 and 25. It may be more, maybe less. And the rate that we're going with inflation this year is probably going to be another 5% for next year. But I'm just showing 3% for FY 24. But this would help also then show you how a property tax increase starting in FY 23 would start to help be part of the solution if you were to so consider that.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Ickle?
Sorry.
Going back to that slide, Mr. Ronzik, these numbers, are they based on any property value increase, assessed value increase, or you're freezing the assessed value and increasing the levy every year?
Well,
There is a property increase in the market, property value, and therefore the assessed value has gone up. And because of that, we will be getting more.
well, actually, I mean, that's a common misconception is that you think that if assessed value goes up, our property tax revenue goes up, or if assessed value goes down, our property tax revenue goes down. That really isn't the case. How this works is the board sets the property tax levy, and we're allowed to increase that up to 5% next year. So that's why I use 5%. So it's a fixed amount, and then that fixed amount is divided over the assessed valuation. So if a person's home value went up, if their assessed value went up, all it means is their rate is going down. We don't fix the rate, we
Okay.
fix the total amount, and you arrive at the rate by dividing the property tax levy by the assessed value to come up with the rate. So as the assessed value goes up, the rates go down. As the assessed value goes down, the rates go up, but our property tax levy remains the same. So it's just it's not intuitive, so I can understand why you or anyone else would think that. I used to think that before I.
Is
into
this a common practice in the counties to do it the way we are doing, or is it?
No, that is the
other?
way it's supposed to be done, and throughout the state of Illinois at least.
Okay,
That's the way it's done.
okay.
So the one question I have, Mr. Onzik, is we have put in the request for Department of DCEO for the $17.5 million that was approved in this year's state budget for the reimbursement of the bonds for Long Meadow Parkway. It is with great hope that we will receive that money this year, but it's with hope, but the money is going to come. It's guaranteed. So how will that impact, or will that have any impact upon next year's budget?
Well, I mean, in terms of that, those specific line items, yes, that would impact it, but that those funds need to be then set aside to be only used for the repayment of the bonds. It cannot be used for any other purpose. And so then the county would have an opportunity to then decide whether it's going to have a toll, no toll, what amount of toll in order to deal with that. So that's a whole separate issue, and it's totally related and completely related to the toll bridge itself and what the options are for the county with that, but it cannot be used for anything else.
Oh, no.
Just like toll revenue cannot be used for anything else.
So we'll put that discussion aside, and once
Yes.
the money is received, then we can have that discussion.
Okay.
All right.
I think I just have a couple more slides. So this shows you the reserves, and this is assuming that what we drew down this year is going to be put back. So that's where we get the 29 million. And there may be more if we have additional savings, it may be higher than that. But I didn't want to speculate as to the savings and, overly inflate it. So we'll have a minimum, I would say, of the 29 million to draw from. And if we're going to draw down 16 million this year to balance the budget and not do a property tax increase, or any other changes, we'll have $12.7 million left.
Madam Chair, I want, Tepe here, I want
Tepe,
to
yes.
point out that there are people out there putting out misinformation about reserves that the county has and whether or not those reserves could be used for this budget. So I want to point out that what Mr. Onset is presenting, these are the only reserves that are available to be used at all for our budget. that correct?
Yes, it is, unless if the board would choose to use some of the capital fund, then they, by resolution, it could move some of the money out of the capital fund to also be used. But we don't have enough in the capital fund for our capital needs. So, I mean, that would not make sense to me, but it is an option.
How much is in the capital fund?
Oh, I haven't looked at that. It's not very much.
Okay.
Oh boy, I don't want to put out a figure and be totally wrong, so I can look it up and send it to you.
Yes, yeah, oh, do you know?
Caius? No, I don't know the figure. I know that we had just are completing a study of our capital needs and it's going to be required. Whatever we have in the capital fund is not going to be sufficient. I think we're dividing it right now over like the next 5 years. It's going to be just to keep up with things. So we don't have the back of the building falling in over here or this happening over there. It is required. It's a very minimum amount for this size of a government.
Okay.
So if you're looking at taking capital funds out, expect the things to start falling apart.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
I have a question relative to that chart. Does that include consideration of this year's excess funds that we'll have formal notification of in March?
Yes, well, I mean, that's to the penny, obviously. we don't know, but
Because that's going to be somewhere between 10 and 12 million
that's already in here, unfortunately, yes.
for and leaving us with the 12th or the
Yes,
16.
yes.
Okay.
Nice try.
All right, so, okay, equity adjustment. So I wanted to clarify something. I think I misunderstood or forgot, I don't know what, but the $700,000 equity adjustment that we've been talking about, that's been included, it already did include a portion for the state's attorney's office. I did not think it did, and so I've been telling you it didn't, and that we needed something from the state's attorney if they want something. But there is $163,000 within that $700,000 that was, I don't want to say earmarked because it's just a preliminary figure, but when the calculation by Human Resources was done, they included all the state's attorney personnel in it, and the portion that is attributed, at least within that $700,000 calculation, was $163,356. So there is that amount there, but this 700,000, which includes a small amount for the state's attorney's office, was based on the compensation study by McHenry County, which, and I don't know the details, and maybe Mr. Surges could fill us in on that if you need to know, but it was not just a comparison to Lake County and DuPage County. It was a comparison to other counties as well, like for probably McHenry County and others. And I think 1 or 2 municipalities may have been included in there as well. And so as a result of adding other counties and municipalities, it brought the average down by which our salaries were compared to, which is why the amount for the state's attorney's office only ended up being 163,000. Well, they have done the work of comparing their salaries to Lake County and DuPage County, because those are the counties to which they are losing their employees, just as many of us are. And so in comparison to those counties, in order to retain our employees so as not to lose them to those counties, they came up with a first year equity adjustment of $1,068,000. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong, $1,110,000. That's not counting FICA or IMRF. Then if you deduct the 163,000 that's already part of that 700,000 we've been talking about, that's already included in this projected budget, what we're really talking about is adding 946,000. But when you add in FICA and IMRF, it's 1,068,000. So roughly it's adding another $1 million to the budget. And then the only thing I just wanted to just make sure you understood is that the 700,000, as I just said, has to do with a comparison to a wider group of counties, whereas the state's attorney is just to Lake and DuPage counties. So if you were to approve the request for the state's attorney, you would just have to understand that it's using a different methodology than you're already considering doing for the rest of the county. And so there is that inconsistency. And I think out of fairness, you would need to consider then, do we do the same for everyone, use the same methodology, compare only to DuPage and to Lake County for everyone? And just for a rough calculation, if the state's attorney came out with 580% more by comparing to just Lake and DuPage counties, conceivably, it would be the same increase for everyone else, which would then bring the total amount we would need to about $4.6 million to cover everyone with an equity adjustment that's comparable to just DuPage and Lake counties. Otherwise, if you want to do it the same for state's attorney and everyone else with the McHenry County compensation study, then you could stay with the 700,000. So I just wanted to make sure that you were clear on the differences. Hopefully I didn't confuse you, so that you knew what it really was you needed to decide upon. And I think,
So I see Mr. Iqbal.
I'm
and
sorry.
We're all kind of, whoa,
I'm waiting for you to sing it.
whoa. So that would mean, and then I'm trying to get the exact number. That would mean that we would be $20 million in deficit, approximately $21 million deficit. Is that what we're looking at if we were to approve that?
If you were to use the same methodology of an equity adjustment for everyone, well, let's see, the total, oh boy, the total would be the 4.6 million instead of the 700,000. So I think you would reduce the 4.6 million by 700,000. So
That's 3.9 million.
yes, so it's roughly 4 million still.
So it would be close to 20
20
million.
million, yes, if you were to do this, yes.
Okay, Mr.
Uh,
Iqbal.
Madam Chair, could you go back to the previous slide? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So this equity adjustment, is it a reasonable adjustment? Is it a arbitrary number that is being thrown at us? Is there a study done?
Yes, I can answer that actually.
Okay.
So Terry Hunt, who I believe is online, is the one who did this. So Terry requested numbers between Lake County and DuPage County, which is actually much more comparable to us than McHenry County. McHenry County probably has 8 or 9 ASAs in comparison to me, who I have over 70. Our population is much more equivalent to Lake County than it is to DuPage County, but DuPage County has an office that functions very similar to ours. The way that Mr. Hunt did this, and again, he is online, it would be much better to explain this than I would, but they have different grade levels. And he compared the years of experience that we had along with the grade levels and then the titles as well. So if there was a chief of criminal division here, which we have one, and a chief of criminal division in DuPage and Lake, he was able to put those all in categories. So this is something that he has been working on for some time now. It is very thorough in terms of how he has done this. And I would turn it over to Mr. Hunt if he would like to add more to what I just said. He might have actually gone home for the day, which would be reasonable, given the amount of work. I do want to say also that I don't know where the McHenry County comparison came for us. And again, I think that was possibly asked of Mr. Surgis, because McHenry County is nowhere in comparison to us in terms of our population. Just anecdotally, I would like you to know that on Monday, a former McHenry County Assistant State's Attorney was started at our office because our pay is better than McHenry County's pay.
Oh,
Yes. So I know. But to inevitably lose him to Lake County or DuPage County if we don't start paying more money. But to me, comparing Kane County to McHenry County should not have happened. And comparing lawyers in my office to municipal lawyers shouldn't happen. That's not the equivalent amount of work that should happen. And so I doubt that. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Hunt is texting. He's not online right now. So, but hopefully that answers your question. We can turn over what we have found to you. The graphs, the charts, the spreadsheets that he has done is a great comparison to show the inequity between ourselves and Lake and DuPage.
Mr. Surgis's hand is up. Mr. Surgis.
Ms. Labrillo is out today and tomorrow, but she has all of those reports fully available, and we are so happy to share those as needed, and we can extract whatever information we need to. So.
Yes, Ms. Bates.
I worked at AT&T Bell Labs for 20 years. I worked at AT&T Bell Labs for 20 years as a tech manager, and we could bump people up gradually to get them to where they needed to be. You didn't give somebody a full raise. You would use year after year.
That's what we're doing. We did this in a 3-part plan. So this is split over 3 years. And we have a plan. So the people who have the most inequity in comparison, we're doing that per employee. And so what we're going to do is that we have a population within ours, and it's again, a third, a third, a third. So to get to where they're supposed to be at, we're doing this over 3 years. I'd like to point out that this is actually happening in the county, but for some reason not happening in my office.
One more question. So do we need the $4 million in the first year or a third of that in the first year?
So I believe we're just doing a third of it.
So is $4 million a third or
1 million, 1 million.
is one,
So
1 million.
again,
because that would be different
It's $1 million.
for the first year.
Yes, but
Then we don't need 5 million.
the
added.
700,000 original projection is the very
Yes.
first year, and
The
that's
first-
going to be tiered
correct.
up.
So the 4 million we don't need in this budget, this upcoming budget, we don't need an extra $4 million.
Well, the $4 million is what I was trying to explain would be the equivalent. I mean, it's just a theoretical equivalent of this, what the $700,000 we've been talking about would be if we use the same methodology.
But the 4 million is more realistic if we're comparing it ourselves to Lake and
And the 4
DuPage.
million is for the first year.
Right.
But I mean, but that's for everyone. That's for everyone using the comparison to Lake and DuPage.
Oh.
But if you're talking about just the state's attorney, it's only 1 million.
only 1 million.
1 million. Mr. Martin.
I have a question, and I know we've received this schedule, but when do we have to have this posted for public review, notwithstanding the fact that we're going to vote on November 29th?
Well, it would need to be posted.
15 days
I-
before.
It's like the early part of November. If the budget's going to be voted on in November 29th, it would have to be posted. I want to say the 14th or 15th
Around
of,
the 14th or 15th of November.
right. So, and we need, the finance department needs some time, depending on what's all going on. We have to finalize that document. So if it's just a couple of little changes, no problem. But if you're going to be making fundamental changes that are kind of touching a lot of accounts, we're going to need several days to finalize that. So anyway, the final budget, I mean, the budget should be getting close to being finalized by the end of October, early November, the very latest, so that we're ready to go with it.
Thank you.
And Mr. Berman, do you remember the date of the Finance Committee meeting in November? We spoke about that.
No, I don't recall exactly.
I think it was the 10th possibly. Was it the Thursday, the 10th?
October. You've
The
got
day before election,
November,
Veterans
November.
Day.
No, it's November.
Finance in October,
No, not October, November.
Ron, November.
finance in November.
It was a special finance committee meeting that she's referring to.
I think it's after the election. I think the day,
November
the
10th.
10th, November 10th.
Yes. So, yeah. But my suggestion would be that everything be finalized, perhaps except whether or not you're going to vote for a property tax increase, that everything else be as final as it could possibly be by the time we get to that point. So that, because it's just becomes too complicated in trying to accommodate and work through the budget, any other changes.
Mr. Sturgis, I see your hand up. If I can just make one point and then I'll recognize you absolutely. The other question we have on my notes here from Ms. Allen is a 4% or 3%. So if we were to do, the thought is that we are going to be doing the first year equity adjustments. In addition, there'll be a 3% cost of living increase because we're just starting to rank up of what the salaries actually should be plus the 3%. And then the following year, it'll be another rank up and then another CPI increase as appropriate, because we're just trying to be equal to what the other counties are compensating their employees for. So there is the conversation. Do you want, given all of this, whatever these numbers actually look like, whether or not you want to use whatever model as you feel appropriate, do you a 4% or a 3% CPI increase for our employees? So that's another combination of numbers we have to pay attention to. Yes, Mr. Martin, but I think Mr. Sturgis, do you have a question?
Yes, just a statement that when Ms. Labrillo is back, and Ms. Bates, you serve on the committee. I don't remember if that $700,000 for the first year in the equity raises. I don't recall off the tip of my tongue if that included the state's attorney's office, but I thought it absolutely did.
It does. It does.
And I did not remember off the tip of my tongue if it, how for the 3-year plan, if that included a cost of living increase per year. But I am more than happy to make sure that Jamie and I get together and get that information back to everybody as early as Monday afternoon.
It does include the 700,000 as in the slides, includes, I'm reading it right now, $163,356 for the state's attorney's office out of
Okay.
that 700,000. Mr. Martin?
I would like to ask that because we're dealing with limited funds and try to accomplish multiple tasks with them, I'd like to suggest that whatever the increase is, if it's 4%, so I have a conversation piece, I'd like to have a portion of that money be at the discretion of the department heads for merit increases and that type of thing, which would give them the flexibility to perhaps address some of these issues in-house and not just have it be a flat sum of money that everybody gets. We need to help them be more flexible in addressing issues. And I think that splitting that in half gives them the flexibility, some flexibility to in fact begin addressing those issues and dealing with the limited funds in a more in a better manner, a more flexible manner. I keep using the word flexible over and over again.
Mr. Onsick, you have a comment on that?
Yes, normally what we've done in the past is just that, where we've taken, there's language within the resolution that where this, like if it's a 3% or a 2% increase, it's that percentage increase of specific departments or elected officials' budget. And then the language of the resolution indicates that the elected official or the department, or I guess we really only have jurisdiction over department heads, but the department heads, it's then up to their discretion how they allocate that
Okay,
increase
as
in their
long as
budget.
as long as that's clear, we need to have that in my opinion.
Okay, so Mr. Winnicki,
Just briefly, once again, so this conversation about the 700,000 for the state's attorney's office, are we discussing this minus the 27 new personnel that will be hired in the future for the Safety Act?
if I understood what you said, that they will be hired at market rate. This is to bring our employees, existing employees up to that market rate.
Okay.
So there may be, unfortunately, unless there has been line item corrections, hypothetically, let's say employee A is making $10,000 a year and you want to hire a new employee. So that's employee B, and you have to pay that individual $15,000 a year. That employee A would have to be brought up
Mhm.
to 15 so that there's equal. And maybe even more because they already have experience within the county.
So are we including those 27 new employees in this entire conversation, or
They're separate
is
from,
this separate
separate
from?
from.
Okay.
and no 3% or
Right,
2%,
correct.
whatever it may be.
Mhm.
CPI increase because they've just started. They should be at market rate, brand new, all set.
Okay.
And Mr. Hunt is now online, so he can give a better description of this.
Sorry, Mr. Hunt.
Oh, who's online?
Terry Hunt.
Terry
Oh,
Hunt is
Mr. Hunt?
Terry is.
Oh, well, hold on just a second. Mr. Hunt, Mr. Iqbal has a quick question. Yes, please.
Okay. Madam Chair, I have two questions on this presentation. I think different yardsticks are being used. On one side, we are saying 580% increase. And that if somebody is making $20, then we are asking that he should be paid $120 per hour. I don't think that is the case. On the other hand, we are saying 4 to 5%. So if same yardstick should be used in these presentation, so it's not confusing. Number two, we are comparing this equity adjustment based on Lake County and DuPage County, who are richer than us. Per capita income is higher, the property values are higher. And that should not be, we should compare with someone who is comparable to us. McHenry, Kendall, Lake, whosoever, it has to be a mix, a comparable mix, a reasonable mix. So those are my comments.
I'm sorry if I caused confusion by using that 580% figure. What I was just trying to do is show the change between what was included for the state's attorney's office in the 700,000, which is 163,000, in comparison to what they're asking for. That change from 163,000 to the I think it's 110. I'm sorry, 1,110,000. I believe that's the increase of 580%. So it's not that a person's salary would be increased by 580%. It's the amount of the budget that we were originally proposing of the 163,000 is increased by 580% to the 1,110,000. So that's where that came from. And then what I did was I used that same percentage then to multiply times the 700,000 to show what it would look like if we did that for everyone instead of just the state's attorney.
We've got, and Mr. Hunt is on the line as well. Mr. Tepe?
Madam Chair, thank you. Tepe here. Several weeks ago, we had my opinion, a really great presentation by Mr. Labrillo about the inequity we had in our pay structure that went into tremendous detail. Now we have, additional information that was done from another source with another set of parameters. Rather than just accept the numbers as a conclusion, I'd like to suggest that, as Mr. Surgis offered and Ms. Moser offered, that we have another presentation based upon this information so that we can have the same level of detail associated with this rather than some extrapolation of numbers. Let's make sure we're doing things based upon solid information, not extrapolation. Thank you.
Ms. Bates and then Mr. Hunt.
I believe that when we talk about a CPI increase, that should be across the board. I've never heard of a CPI increase becoming a merit increase. They're two different things.
Following Mr. Martin, I'm not opposed, if I believe is what he's saying. So if we do 4% across, oh, I'm sorry, 4% across the board, 3% CPI increase, and then 1% is merit,
Is that what you meant, Mr. Martin?
to split
I
it
don't
up a little
believe
bit.
so.
What I mean is I want to give the department heads the discretion to run their departments within the financial parameters that we give them. So if we say to your number 4%, then we have always done that. I mean, what Mr. Onsick is saying, that's the customary way that we have always done it, is to plug the number in there and give the department heads the discretion at how they want to spend that money.
Then I don't think you can call this CPI increase. It's a merit.
Well, I don't care what
increase.
you
No,
call
well,
it.
it's
It's
just
well,
a
it's part,
budget. It's a budget.
I'm just saying that if you want to get the job done and do it and give them some discretion, that's the way that we've got to do it. We can't give discretionary money over and above the cost of living. I mean, we can have that conversation, but we can't go beyond the cost of living and make any sense. We're just giving them the discretion to spend that money in the most productive way.
And I've heard a lot of conversation from our department heads. Never has ever that been brought up as a complaint. Never. I've never heard anybody complain about that.
Well, I am.
I think at Birmingham, I think Ms. Bates is sort of mixing things. What we're talking about is in our increase in our revenue from our tax is just increasing our budget amount, our taxed amount. It's not going directly to the increase in salaries. It's just going into the budget. So there's no comparison between a 5% increase in our revenue from the tax to what we're going to pay the individual.
This says for each additional percent of non-union increase adds 300, total reserves needed for 4% increase is 16 million. We're talking
Can't hear
about
you,
increase
Mavis.
in salary.
Mavis, we can't hear you.
We're talking about, when it says on, proposed fiscal year 2023, I'm on a different page. Each additional percent of non-union increase adds $356,000. Total reserves needed for 4% increase is $16 million. So we are talking about salary increases. We're not talking about anything else here.
I think, I'm sorry if I shouldn't
Go-
be speaking.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Mr.
I
Onsick.
just wanted, I'm not sure, I think there's confusion over the use of the term CPI increase. I tried, and I was just looking to make sure, I think I was trying to be careful and to call it a 3% non-union wage increase, because that's all we've ever really referred to it as technically is a wage increase. And really, I think it's only in our free conversation, we're referring to it as a COLA or a CPI increase. And it really, technically, it's not intended to be that. So I apologize if I've used that term without thinking, it's really wasn't, technically, it's simply a wage increase.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Hunt. It's all yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you, I think. If I'd be happy to answer questions, but maybe it would be more productive for me to explain the way that the equity increase was calculated. Based upon our understanding, as of last week, the $700,000 built into the contingency had already been spoken for. It was not something that included any allocation for the state's attorney. We, over the course of months now, have done comparisons of salaries from Lake County and DuPage County, as those counties are the ones where we seem to be in the most disadvantageous position for competing with quality staff. Lake County already had in existence a grade level that they had been using for a number of years, which seemed reasonable. We took the DuPage County's salary information for the state's attorney's office and created equivalent bandings using the Lake County levels, and then did the same thing with Kane County. We calculated then the average in for ASAs. We did it separately for the ASAs and for the staff, but for the ASAs, not including any part-timers or not including the elected official, there were, I think, 17 or 18 different categories that included positions such as the first assistant and the various chiefs and deputies, and then the ASAs then were graded from K7, which is like the opening entry level positions, all the way up through K11s, which are our most senior. We calculated the average for those positions for Lake and DuPage County, and then compared that average to the pay in Kane County, took that differential and divided it by 3, because that was my understanding of the attempt to make incremental adjustments to the equity. So for the ASAs in our office, 86 of them all told in terms of budgeted positions for the FY23 budget, 86 ASAs. The 1/3 of the difference came to a total of $447,780 spread amongst all of those. And I'm happy to share not only the calculation, but the comparable employment compensation tables from both Lake and DuPage, which were updated as recently as August 31st. So we're not talking about obsolete statistics. We did the same study then with the staff positions, the non-ASAs, and there are about 20 individual grade levels there. We include the individual the executive positions within there, and then we have staff positions starting from the our starting staff at an SO5 level, ranging all the way up to SO9s. Using that same calculation model, we took the average of DuPage and Lake, compared that to the average in Kane County, and for the 85 positions that are budgeted for FY23, that total for staff amounted to $662,398. So between those two figures, that's the $1.1 million that Joe has referenced earlier. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions on that, or like I said, I can provide the all of the statistical support for the calculations.
And this is 1 year out of 3.
Yes, that would be taking the current differential between our average and the average of Lake and DuPage, divided it by 3. And so in theory, if they didn't add any more increases to their salaries, we would be able to create an equivalent base over a period of 3 years. Naturally, they're probably going to have increases as well, so we wouldn't quite accomplish that over 3 years, but we would certainly make significant progress.
Mr. Tepe.
Tepe here again. Again, Madam Chair, I appreciate all of this work and effort, but to hear this verbally is one thing, but to see it presented is something else.
I heard
know.
you. We'll schedule a meeting, sir.
I will do it tomorrow if you want.
Well,
Anytime, we will send the stuff in advance. You will be very impressed with the work Mr. Hunt has done. and how these comparisons have happened. Name the date and place and we'll do it.
I will share that information with you, ma'am, but let
I
Ms.
knew.
Labrillo come back from her 2-day well-earned holiday.
Yes, but again, my request is to have that married with the information from Ms. Labrillo so that we have a more comprehensive amount of information.
Perfect. Would
Okay.
you like him to, Mr. Hunt, to send the spreadsheet to all of you today, tomorrow, well in advance of this meeting? Because it is a very detailed spreadsheet that took me a while to go through.
And
If we can, if we
I would
can
be happy
wait-
to look at that too.
If we can wait, why don't we wait until next week and we can send both the reports out appropriately together to the board and with a signed date when the committee will be meeting again. Okay, so just, you've got lots of other things to consider. And Mr. Hunt, thank you for your work on that. I'm sure that it took, I think it was probably pretty interesting. Took a lot of work, but it was probably fascinating to do.
No, you're welcome.
All right, so. Pause. So to Mr. Martin's point, we're not looking at expenses with the fine tuning of whether or not we need a state's attorney. I'm just pulling up a random page, a state's attorney, safety act position, evidence clerk, body camera individual. We're not going to be detailing that. But the things we have to consider, recommendation, is if it's going to be the 3% or 4%. What did you call it? A salary adjustment? What's the proper term?
It was non-union wage increase,
What is it?
non-union wage increase.
Okay, a 3 or a 4% non-union wage increase.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you.
So we don't mince word or make sure we have the proper vocabulary. Whether or not you would like to consider having a property tax increase, if that is something, because that's going to impact the budget. Is there anything else that I've missed? And then we want to, do we still need to have the perspective of what the draw or not from the reserves historical perspective from, I'd say from when this board was seated. So that was the 20 budget, the 21 and 22. So it'd be a 3-year comparison of what we're using now for the reserves. And that would be, I think that'd be relatively easy to put together.
Are you asking for what we budgeted to use for reserves versus what we actually ended up using?
I think a little bit of both, what we budgeted and then we actually used. Or projected to use in the case of 22. Is there anything else?
Bo says it's time.
Well, if Mr. Iqbal says we're good.
Get out into daylight.
And we did pretty well. I said about 4:30. It's before
Yeah, I
5.
would move we adjourn.
This is International Protect Democracy Day, and I think we did a good job of it.
Okay, very good. Okay,
Me? What you got in your pocket?
okay, so may I have a motion and a second to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
I
Mr.
second.
Mr. Iqbal seconds, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay, have a great day, everybody.
Have a
Uh,
great day, everybody.
You too, Michelle.
And let's thank Mr. Onsick for his hard work on this,
Thank you, Mr. Anzick.
always.
Thank you, Mr. Anzick.
She was-